Have you felt it? A strange and subtle degradation of the very air we breathe, a thinning of our collective intellectual atmosphere. It is the unnerving sensation of shouting into a void, of presenting a nuanced, well-reasoned argument only to see it bounce off a smooth, impenetrable wall of tribal dogma and emotional reaction. It is the chilling experience of watching entire populations, armed with more information than at any point in human history, slide with a terrifying, ecstatic enthusiasm into states of profound and militant ignorance. We are living in a great and terrible paradox. A world drowning in data, yet starving for wisdom. A world of instantaneous global connection, yet fractured into 1,000 warring, isolated realities where consensus is mistaken for truth. You may have dismissed this as a political problem, a matter of the other side being brainwashed or irrational. But what if the issue is far deeper, more pervasive, and more personal than that? What if the very foundations of our ability to think for ourselves, to reason, to analyze, to hold complexity, to differentiate truth from falsehood, are actively and systematically being eroded? What if we are not just witnessing the decline of independent thought, but are participating in the birth of a new and terrifying psychological phenomenon, a state of mass conformity? A shared, networked and technologically supercharged flight from the terror and responsibility of individual consciousness itself, a world in which human reason is being steadily and willingly replaced. This is not a question of declining IQ scores, it is a question of a declining psychic immunity. Our minds have become like bodies with a compromised immune system, susceptible to every passing virus of misinformation, every inflammatory meme, every comforting group illusion. We have lost the cognitive antibodies that protect us from delusion. The great depth psychologists like Carl Jung and philosophers like Søren Kierkegaard foresaw this danger with a chilling prescience. They understood that the greatest threat to human consciousness is not the darkness of the unknown, but the seductive, blinding light of the collective. The vanishing of independent thought is not a failure of education. It is a profound spiritual and psychological crisis. It is the symptom of a civilization that is systematically choosing the comfort of the herd over the arduous, lonely, and absolutely essential work of becoming a sovereign individual. The architecture of the herd mind, the primal terror of exile. To understand the death of independent thought, we must first understand the enemy. And the enemy is not a person or a political party. The enemy is a fundamental and terrifying aspect of the human psyche itself, our innate, primal, and deeply unconscious pull toward the collective. The human mind is not, by default, a truth-seeking instrument. It is a belonging-seeking instrument. Our deepest, most primal instinct is not to be correct, but to be safe. And for the vast majority of human history, safety meant one thing and one thing only: belonging to the tribe. For our ancestors on the savannah, to think differently, to question the group's sacred beliefs, was not a sign of intellectual courage. It was a death sentence. To be cast out of the tribe was to be left to the wolves, to starvation, to certain annihilation. This ancient, primordial terror of exile is still encoded in our psychic DNA. It hums beneath the surface of our modern, civilized lives. The need to be right is, for most people, utterly secondary to the profound biological need to be one of us. Conformity is not a character flaw, it is our factory setting. To think for oneself is, at its very core, an act of rebellion against this instinct. It is the deliberate and often physically painful act of stepping outside the warm, comforting, and neurologically rewarding circle of the collective consensus and choosing to stand alone in the cold, uncertain, and terrifying space of your own individual judgment. It requires an ego that is strong enough to withstand the terror of being wrong, the shame of being different, and the primal cellular fear of being cast out. It is, in the most literal sense, an unnatural act. What we are witnessing today is a systematic and technologically accelerated dismantling of the psychological structures that make this unnatural act possible. The platforms of our digital world are not designed to foster individual thought. They are designed to amplify psychic contagion. The algorithm, the true invisible god of our age, is not programmed to show you what is true. It is programmed to show you what is engaging, and what is most engaging to the primal human psyche. The content that confirms our existing biases, that validates our tribal identity, and that stokes our righteous outrage against the other. The internet has not created a global village. It has created a billion digital villages, each one a perfect, self-validating echo chamber, each one convinced of its own absolute righteousness and the absolute evil of the village next door. We have used our most advanced technology to build the most efficient machine for tribal reinforcement in the history of the world. This is the creation of a group illusion. Within the echo chamber, certain ideas are repeated so often and with such emotional intensity that they cease to be perceived as opinions and begin to be perceived as self-evident truths. To question these truths is not just to be wrong, it is to be morally deficient, to be a bad person. The individual mind, faced with this overwhelming social pressure, performs a quiet act of cognitive suicide. It is psychologically easier to betray your own perception of reality than to betray your tribe. And so you begin to see what the group sees, to believe what the group believes, not because you have been convinced by evidence, but because the alternative, the terror of exile, is simply too much to bear. This is what Carl Jung called a psychic epidemic, a state where individual consciousness is dissolved into the undifferentiated emotional consciousness of the herd. This is the definition of mass conformity. It is not a lack of intelligence, but the complete abdication of it. The death of the nuance, the rise of the binary, moralized mind. A primary symptom of this slide into mass conformity is the catastrophic loss of nuance. Independent thought is, above all, the ability to hold complexity, to tolerate ambiguity, and to engage with paradox. It is the understanding that the world is not a simple cartoon of good versus evil, but a complex tapestry of competing truths, gray areas, and tragic ironies. The mature mind is one that can say, as F. Scott Fitzgerald famously wrote, that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. The herd mind, however, cannot tolerate nuance. Nuance is a threat to its very existence. The herd requires a simple, binary, and highly moralized world to maintain its coherence and its emotional charge. You are either with us or against us. You are either a hero or a villain. You are either enlightened or evil. This simplistic black and white thinking is the hallmark of the primitive archetypal mind. It is the psychology of the crusade, the jihad, the witch hunt. It feels powerful, it feels righteous, and it is the absolute death of all true thought. Our modern information ecosystem is a machine designed to grind all nuance into dust. Headlines are written not to inform, but to inflame. Social media rewards not the thoughtful, complex, multi-part argument, but the short, sharp, and emotionally satisfying dunk. We are being systematically trained to react, not to reflect. We are being conditioned to see the world not as a complex reality to be understood, but as a series of simple propositions to be either liked or hated, shared or condemned. This binary mind makes it impossible to solve complex problems. For complex problems, climate change, economic inequality, geopolitical conflict, require the ability to see the issue from multiple perspectives, to understand the valid concerns of the other side, and to synthesize opposing truths into a higher, more integrated solution. The binary mind can only do one thing: it can fight. And so, we find ourselves in a world of perpetual, low-grade civil war. A world where every issue becomes another bloody battleground in the same tiresome and ultimately meaningless tribal conflict. The person who attempts to introduce nuance into this environment is treated not as a thoughtful contributor, but as a traitor. To say, well, it's a bit more complicated than that, is to commit a profound act of heresy. You have failed to demonstrate your absolute unquestioning allegiance to the tribal dogma, and so you are cast out, labeled as an enabler, a centrist, or a traitor, which are all, in the logic of the herd, synonymous with enemy. The inevitable result is a profound and terrifying public silence. The thoughtful, the nuanced, the independent thinkers retreat from the public square, leaving the arena to the loudest, the most certain, and the most mindlessly dogmatic voices. The outsourcing of the mind, the illusion of knowledge, and the abdication of authority. Another more insidious factor in the vanishing of independent thought is the creation of what can be called the illusion of knowledge. The internet has given us unprecedented access to information. We carry in our pockets a device that can summon the answer to almost any factual question in an instant. But this has had a paradoxical and devastating effect on our minds. We have mistaken access to information for the possession of knowledge. True knowledge is not the ability to look up a fact. It is the deep, internal, and often laboriously constructed mental framework that allows you to understand the meaning of that fact, to place it in its proper context, and to connect it to other facts in a coherent and meaningful way. It is something you build, slowly and painstakingly, inside your own mind through a process of reading, reflection, and critical engagement. It is the process of creating your own inner authority. We no longer do this. We have outsourced our memory to Google and our opinions to our chosen thought leaders. When a new, complex issue arises, our instinct is not to retreat, to read deeply from multiple sources, and to slowly and carefully form our own opinion. Our instinct is to immediately go to our preferred news site, our favorite podcast, our trusted Twitter feed, and to download the correct opinion, the pre-packaged set of talking points that will allow us to signal our allegiance to our tribe. We have become intellectual consumers, not producers. We are not thinking. We are choosing a pre-thought package that aligns with our identity. This creates a dangerous and fragile state of being. We walk around with the confident and often aggressive certainty of an expert, but we are, in fact, utterly hollow. We can repeat the talking points, we can deploy the correct buzzwords, but we cannot defend our position from first principles. When our downloaded opinion is challenged, we do not have the intellectual resources to engage in a reasoned debate. We can only react with fear and anger, because a challenge to our opinion is not a request for a debate. It is a threat to our identity, an attack on our connection to our tribe. And so, we respond not with arguments, but with ad hominems, with condemnation, with the furious and panicked defense of a self that we sense, on some deep level, is a complete and utter fraud. This abdication of personal authority makes us profoundly susceptible to manipulation. Without a well-developed inner framework for discerning truth, we are at the mercy of the most sophisticated propaganda machine ever created. We are moved not by the force of the better argument, but by the emotional contagion of the viral meme, the comforting certainty of the conspiracy theory, the righteous fury of the mob. We have given away the keys to our own minds, and we are surprised when we find that we have become prisoners. The path of the sovereign mind: how to survive in an age of mass conformity. If this is the diagnosis, what is the cure? How does one survive and even thrive in an age that is so hostile to the very act of thinking for oneself? The answer is as simple as it is impossibly difficult. You must choose to become an individual. You must consciously and deliberately undertake the work of psychological differentiation, of extricating your own soul from the sticky, unconscious web of the collective. This is the path of the sovereign mind. The first step on this path is a radical and unapologetic commitment to your own direct experience of reality. You must learn to trust the evidence of your own senses and the judgment of your own reason over the pronouncements of the tribe, no matter how loud, how certain, or how morally righteous they seem. You must be willing to be the one person in the room who says, "The emperor has no clothes." This requires immense courage, the courage to be wrong, the courage to be shamed, the courage to be alone. It requires you to value truth more than you value belonging. For most people, this is a price they are not willing to pay. The second step is the conscious cultivation of a rich and deep inner life. In a culture that is addicted to external stimulation and validation, you must become a warrior for your own solitude. You must carve out sacred time and space to be alone with your own thoughts, free from the endless polluting noise of the collective. It is only in this silence that the quiet, subtle voice of your own truth can be heard. You must read books, not just headlines. You must engage with the great, timeless minds of history, not just the fleeting, hysterical opinions of the present moment. You must build an inner citadel of wisdom that is so strong and so well stocked that the foolishness of the world can no longer breach its walls. You must, in essence, choose to become a member of a different, invisible tribe, the tribe of all the great independent thinkers throughout history who have chosen the difficult path of individual consciousness. Finally, and most crucially, you must undertake the difficult and essential work of shadow integration. You must turn your critical gaze inward. You must come to see that the irrationality, the prejudice, and the dogmatism that you so clearly see in the other side also exists within you. You must take responsibility for your own projections, your own biases, your own primal tribal instincts. A true independent thinker is not the person who is a master at deconstructing the arguments of others. They are the person who is a master at deconstructing their own. They have the humility to know that they are just as susceptible to delusion as anyone else, and they therefore maintain a state of constant, vigilant self-examination. They are not fighting a war against the stupidity of the world. They are engaged in a lifelong, compassionate, and ruthless war against the stupidity within themselves. They are more interested in being true than in being right. This is the path. It is a lonely path. It is a path that will not win you friends or influence in the conventional sense. It will not make you popular. In fact, it will almost certainly make you a target for the righteous fury of the herd. But it is the only path that leads to a life of genuine integrity, of psychological sovereignty, and of true, unshakable sanity. The world, in its current trajectory, may be choosing the path of the herd, the path of the echo chamber, the path of mass conformity, and the replacement of human reason. But you do not have to go with it. In any age, no matter how dark, the future of human consciousness is carried not by the masses, but by a small, dedicated, and often invisible minority of conscious individuals who have had the immense courage to think for themselves. The choice to be one of them is the most radical, the most revolutionary, and the most important act you can take in the world today. Your mind is the last and only true frontier. The question is whether you will be its colonist or its king.